Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where we talk about the Constitution, history, politics, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. And as you'll find out, today I'm going to be talking about that pretty much anything else category. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher, a few other places. Also, if you want to see what we look like, go to YouTube and type in Annette Talks, and you will find the podcast there. All right, and as I have been doing for the past several episodes, I'm going to be doing a Constitution Minute. And so I just wanted to point something out here today. I don't think most people realize, I'll bet Sam does. Sam's my host or my guest that I have not introduced yet, but the first three articles of the Constitution. Sam, do you happen to know what the first article is?
Oh, no. Yeah, I'd have to go back through. I can't quote any of it by number.
That's all right. It's the three articles that set up the government. And a lot of people think that the executive is the first one because they think the president is the most important, but it's not. The first article is actually for the legislative branch, and it was done on purpose because Congress is supposed to be more important than the executive branch because Congress makes the laws. Article 2 is the executive branch, which most of us know as the presidency. And then Article 3 is the judiciary, which most of us just think of the Supreme Court. It does set up the Supreme Court, but also the federal court system. So that's been your Constitution Minute. All right, and so today we are going to be talking about something that I personally needed a lot of help with, and you'll find that I sometimes do this. I find something that, well, let's just put it this way. A little while back, I posted on Facebook, I said, sometimes being a mom sucks. And I got all sorts of reactions. The first one was like, no, it doesn't. And I wanted to say, hey, lady, you don't know what my life's like. But I had so many responses from other moms and some dads in there that said, yes, it does. And then, of course, it's also fulfilling, yada, yada. But there was a lot of discussion in there that made me realize I'm not the only one going through a lot of difficulties parenting, and specifically parenting difficult children. And I think that because we're in the last days, the children are more difficult now than they used to be. I'll have to ask Sam what he thinks about that. But I spent a lot of time talking to other moms that are in the same boat with me. And I'm a single mom, so it's harder than what a lot of married moms might be going through, although I don't denigrate what they're going through as well, because even when I was married, it was still very difficult parenting. So I've decided that today's topic is going to be on parenting difficult children. And so I brought in an expert, and we have Mr. Sam Babcock with us. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I know you personally, and that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you. And so you sent over to me your little bio today so I could tell everyone why you're so awesome with kids. But this is what you said. You said, prior to working as a therapist, I worked with families of children to prevent out-of-home placement. And I was joking with you ahead of time that sometimes I would like to place my children out of my home. Right. With children in residential treatment and with youth returning to the community on parole. You graduated with a master's in clinical mental health counseling from Adams State College, and you were licensed while providing intensive in-home therapy for families of children at risk for out-of-home placement due to harm to self, legal concerns, and abuse. And you've worked in private practice for over 5 years, providing counseling for individuals, couples, and families regarding a range of issues, and your current focus is OCD and trauma treatment. So it sounds like you've got a lot of experience working with kids with big issues and helping them to try and stay with their families.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of been all around the gamut, working with the kids individually, before the placement, during placement, after placement. And working with the families trying to help bridge the gaps or help them succeed at home. So.
Awesome. Luckily, it hasn't gotten that far for me yet. But, you know, I can see with some of the issues even that I'm dealing with, how easy it would be for a parent to feel overwhelmed or for something to get so out of control that you need someone to come in. I actually had an incident a few years ago. I'll share briefly, and then I want to ask you what your philosophy is, your underlying philosophy on dealing with difficult children. But a few years ago was my 49th birthday. So yeah, this is about 4 years ago. And I remember because it was a Sunday night and it was in September and it was nice out. So my window was open in my bedroom. And my daughter had asked me if she could take her phone to school the next day. And I told her no, because I don't allow, well, they only get a smartphone occasionally. They definitely can't take it to school. And so she proceeded to start screaming at me. Well, we finally got past that. Everyone was getting ready for bed, and then there was a doorbell ring. And I was like, who the heck is at my front door? This is very strange. So I go to the front door, and it's the police. And they said, oh, somebody called in and said that there was a domestic abuse going on or something. There was a woman and a man screaming at each other. And I thought, who is the man in this scenario? I don't really get that. My voice isn't that deep. But, obviously that somebody had heard us. I mean, mostly it was Abby. I mean, one of my children screaming and me defending myself from that. But if something like that could happen in a mostly reasonable household and the police can come for something like that, I can see how easy it would be for things to get out of control when kids start really acting out. And I will probably be sharing some more as we go on, but tell us then your underlying philosophy on parenting difficult children.
Yeah, so I come from a few different backgrounds. One of those is attachment theory. And I'll note, as a broad sense, sometimes people confuse that with attachment parenting, which is generally associated with things that are a little bit more atypical in parenting, like breastfeeding until a child's older or things like that. Mm-hmm. So that can relate to attachment theory, but that's not attachment theory. Okay. So that's one of the pieces, is looking at those relationships and the emotional connections, the importance of those in behaviors and in those things. Along those lines, with parenting, I often subscribe to what would be considered positive discipline or positive parenting along those ways. And there's a number of different authors that fall under those guidelines. This is different from what people would look at. Sometimes there's other more behavioral methods that are popular and have been for decades. Behavioral parenting has been kind of a standard for a long time. And it has, there are some great pieces about that we learned from behaviorism. But I feel like there's also some gaps. A chunk of my experience, I work with parents a lot to do behavioral things, which largely comes down to things like incentives or punishments, so to speak, somewhere along that line. What can you do to shift the behavior? Also within there is emotion coaching, is a part that you'll see a lot on the positive discipline or positive parenting methods. So those styles tend to focus on behaviors or tend to be a normal thing. It's a part we can expect. They tend to be an outgrowth of emotional needs and different challenges and kind of navigating emotions, right? We have that as adults still. So basically it's the approach that considers like those outbursts, those things like, screaming and being really upset about not being able to have something you want, like a phone at school, right? Mm-hmm. Are, while very uncomfortable and can even be embarrassing and such, with some of those are fairly normal. We all have to figure out how to deal with emotions, strong emotions and disappointment. And so it looks at it more as trying to help coach the child and help the child work through, okay, here's the emotion. Here's an appropriate way to deal with that. How do you get through that emotion?
I also close my windows now, by the way. I close my windows because if my kids start screaming, even if I'm not screaming, if they're screaming, I always say, we don't want the police to come again. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, well, that's in essence kind of the philosophy with those. So I like to work with when it's children with behavior problems or there's different concerns like that or emotional issues. I always like to work with parents. It's more helpful if parents can be involved. Sometimes there's a tendency to want, there's kind of like, I guess the overall feel sometimes is like, here's my child, fix them. And I don't really work that way so much. Sometimes if parents are more disengaged with it, then it'll be more working just with the child. But in almost every case, the parents are going to be able to do more good than I will as a therapist.
Right.
If they're able to apply some of those principles and some of those things.
You recommended a book to me a long time ago. I know I posted something on Facebook. This was a few years ago. And you recommended a book to me, and I cannot remember the name of it right now. But it talked about emotion. What's that?
Yeah, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. I think.
And I probably need to go reread that. But one of the things that it taught me was staying calm And that's one of the hardest things to do as a parent when the kids are acting out in a way that's triggering. And so staying calm, I find is one of the most difficult parts, but I firmly believe that. I think it's just that a lot of times, we learn these principles, we learn them, we do them for a while, and then it's like we unlearn them and things start unraveling, and the kids get older, and as they get older, and now 2 of my kids are taller than me, and as they get taller and bigger, it's like things that just change, and the problems get bigger as well as the child.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes when kids get to a certain age. Sometimes when it's later teen years, it's almost like, well, your ability to have some of that influence starts to wane more and more, and so the principles don't really shift, but how much influence you can have on that does. At some point, it gets to be when they get to be older kids, it gets to be a little bit more of here's hoping that we cross my fingers, hoping that we got the message through and that they're going to turn out okay, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I really do think that parenting is, it's like you're just throwing stuff out there, or like it's like throwing something at the wall and hoping it sticks. We just feel like, I feel like half the time I'm doing a good job and the other half not so good, and it's really, really hard because sometimes your kids are doing pretty well and things are going on. You're like, oh, I guess I'm doing all right. And then other times you're like, what is wrong with me? I really suck at this. This is really bad. Now, you don't have any kids, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So you haven't had to do the firsthand
running solo.
Yeah, experience.
Well, yeah, not from the parent side. I have about 16 nieces and nephews. Oh. And, I consider, I tried to be involved with them, but I'm not their parent, so there's, it's not quite the same role because, it's always that thing, you can kind of have fun and mess them up and give them back, so to speak. But
yeah, they probably think you're cool. My oldest likes to tell me I'm awkward all the time.
Yeah, they're getting older, so I don't think they think I'm as cool as they did when they were little kids,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a silly question, but is it normal for kids to think that their parents just are nothing, they're like not impressive at all? And
yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem too unusual. I mean, some kids have like a close relationship. A lot of people will think pretty highly of their parents, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you got to be the ones that give them the bad news too, right? So,
yeah. Well, I mean, like, okay, let's just be honest. My 13-year-old, if she's funny, and I'm going to use her for some of the questions because I went on Facebook and I asked parents if they have questions for how to deal with difficult children. And so I was the first one. I mean, the reason that I started this topic was because I've got difficult children at home. But my oldest is now 13 going on 20. And she's been a hard kid since almost day one. One of her first phrases to me was, "Bad mom." I'll never forget pushing her in the stroller. She had to be no more than like one. "Bad mom." What? But she always says I'm awkward. Mom, you're awkward. She doesn't like being seen with me in public. And she doesn't think I'm funny. None of the kids think I'm funny. No, I mean, I'm like the least appreciated person in my house. But anyway, I come out of a relationship where I was verbally abused. I won't say where, but I was in one of those relationships. And so now she knows that it triggers me for her to call me names. So I have this thing inside. It's like there's a struggle between two wolves going on, right? The one that says, she is being so disrespectful to you right now. You cannot allow her to call you stupid. You just can't. And then there's the other wolf inside of me that says, she wants a reaction. Don't give her a reaction. Walk away. And so I struggle between those two all the time because I can't imagine ever having talked to my parents like that when I was a kid. I probably would have had my mouth washed out with soap or whatever. But funnily enough, the other day, she called me stupid and I just turned and I walked and I went upstairs and I could hear her going, "Stupid, stupid, stupid." And I came into my office and I closed the door and I heard her say, "Mom, what are you going to do about it?" And I thought,
wow, it's definitely egging on there. Huh?
I just completely ignored it, and of course then it stopped. But what do you say about that? If you have kids that are disrespectful, like in your face disrespectful like that, and you don't want to get in a power struggle, but you feel like they need to speak to you respectfully?
Yeah, well, one of the pieces too is, as you mentioned, those two different poles. Those are some of the natural poles that we have, right? We're hardwired for different our emotions. Well, I'm jumping around here a little bit. Emotions, I would say, are number one, just alarm system. That's all they are. It's an alarm system, and like any other alarm, is telling us what could be wrong, right?
Okay.
And then we have kind of some natural responses to those. Part of that alarm system is for yourself, right? To your individual needs to protect yourself from harm, from attack. And so when you feel attacked in different ways, when somebody crosses a line, we get some of those pushback, right? Maybe a fear response, anger response is I say anger is the emotion that tells us basically we need a boundary, right? It's somebody crossed the line, you need a boundary is what anger is telling you. How to do that, that's up to choice, right? So when you're feeling that one side, which is like, she can't talk to me that way, right? It's like, you're gonna feel that because you are being attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it feels like you're attacked and it's not the intention, that's still the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So the other side is connection. We're mammals, which means we're hardwired. A big chunk of the rest of our emotions is about connection, because when we're connected in a group, we're safe. So technically, connection goes back to physical safety and individual. This is where mammals, though, have the balance of the individual versus the group, right? And so what you're noticing is the conflict of those two competing needs, and not totally competing, but there has to be a balance of those things. So I say a lot of times a healthy boundary is a balance of connection and limit. We're both working on connecting. How do we connect and set a limit as well? Sometimes that's helpful to do it at the same time, and that can be a good strategy. A lot of times I say both and is something I learned early on in graduate school training, right? Rather than either or, rather than the buts, is both and. And sometimes, there may be just empathy up front and the limit later. Sometimes we're dropping off empathy piece in the beginning and may just be a clear direction. Usually, though, so I'm giving you, I guess, an overarching strategy first. To narrow it down sometimes is, just as you said, number one is we have to do our own work. What's happening there is you're noticing some of the feed off of those different emotions. And I think it's important to note parents don't cause all of the emotional problems in children. It's not. So what's happening there is not all your fault, so to speak, or their father's fault or something like that, right? It is, they have their own personalities as well, but wherever it comes from, those emotions will feed each other, because now we're not safe. So if you're not feeling safe, they're not going to feel safe. If they're not feeling safe, you're not. And that's going to tend to spiral up, into more tension. So you can't make them calm down and be respectful. They're more likely to be respectful if they're feeling calm and loved and considered, just like you. So that's the first part, as you noted earlier, right, from that book, right, is like, if you can notice and calm yourself first, then and even if that's sometimes the initial boundary, I'm going to take a break for a moment. If they're old enough, I'm going to just go out and go for a little bit of a walk. I'll be back. We'll talk about this after I get back. And, do something with that, assuming, of course, they're going to be safe, right? But whatever it is, or slowing yourself down in the moment, that's the first part that can help, because if you are calm, your presence in being calm will affect their nervous system without them even wanting it to. If you're agitated, you're going to affect their nervous system without you even wanting it to.
Yeah, because I think she's an anxious kid. I think she's very tightly wound. She's like a type A. Everything must be perfect. She likes to organize. And so I know there's some anxiety there. I don't know why that pushes her to want to have control, power struggles with me, but that's what I usually see, is that as soon as her anxiety level rises, oh, I'm going after mom. I don't get that.
Well, and you hit on some of that. There is looking for some of that. There's two main pieces that we'll hit a lot of times. You could break this down into more categories, but I think overarching, you could break it down to a nutshell of the needs for children to have connection and the need for control. And I don't use control in a bad way. A lot of times we think control, well, let's get them out of that habit and they're not in control, right? Well, they need control. We all do. We're not, this may go back to some of the constitutional philosophy you could say too, but we're not wired to be controlled.
Mm-hmm.
When people try to control us, you can see this no matter the situation, whether in families, whether in relationships, whether in the world, although people at times will submit, depending on what's going on out of fear, we're not wired to be controlled. We're wired for independence in part and connection on the other part. And that balance, like I was talking about, when we feel like that independence is coming over, we don't have that independence, that control that we need, we're likely to push back. There's likely to be aggressive. If we feel like we can't safely be aggressive, or our values don't dictate that, our next stop is passive aggressive, right?
We don't like
passive, we don't
like passive aggressive. No.
Oh, right. See, and that's indirect, right?
Right.
So I know I'm a bit of a tangent there, but I guess I would say in part with those though is, I totally lost my train of thought on that. So, coming back though, so where was I at? I think I lost.
When I said that my kid's anxious and I can see when her anxiety level rises, a lot of times she wants to have a power struggle with me, and I don't understand that.
Yeah. Sorry, the connection and control. I lost myself on a tangent off of that, did I?
All right.
So right. So in that moment, some things that can be helpful is one, providing the connection, especially up front before those things happen. Two is giving her options for control. What does she have control over in her life? If we go at it with a control attitude ourselves, they have to think or feel or act certain ways, but especially think and feel, they're likely to push back, and anybody is. Yeah. If somebody tells you what you have to think or feel, that's like one of the biggest ones to trigger that aggressive alarm, right? It's like, whoa, that's out of bounds. That's off limits. That's mine. I get to choose what I think. I get to choose what I believe. I get to choose what I feel. Well, I don't really choose feelings, but you know what I mean. So one of those things is providing options where there are options, and a healthy boundary is about what you're going to do, not what they have to do. And that's a different way, I think, to look at it. So when she's having that anxiety, number one is what she's needing as a child is a safe place. She needs to know that those fears, she can be there and it's going to be okay. So sometimes reflecting, and this is where empathic listening, or what is sometimes called reflecting, comes in, where you're just acknowledging the emotion that's coming up, not trying to say what to do with it or tell her what's good or bad or what's up or down. And in that case, in the initial response, I probably wouldn't address the insult. I'd probably just say, you're really upset at me. You really think I'm an idiot, right? You think I'm dumb. You just can't believe, right? And how do you think she would?
That's so hard. That's so like opposite of, it's funny. I'm going to go off on a little tangent now.
Yeah.
I can too. I'm reading this book, Children the Challenge. And I think it was written, this is like really old school. And I think that a lot of the other books that we read are based partly on this. By Rudolf Dreikurs. Anyway, it was written in the early 60s, and it was like, and all the revolutionary stuff is starting to go on. And one of the things it talks about in the book is that we have to treat our children in a more democratic way as opposed to being autocratic, And so, like, I was born in 68, so I'm a child of the late 60s or whatever. But I was raised with, you just do what your parents tell you to do. Right? And you don't dream of talking back to them, or you knew you were going to get hit, or, we used to get spanked with a wooden spoon and all that stuff. And I've never believed in spanking or anything like that. So that's in the past, but it's like, also, they're not going to go for it. Just do what we tell you to do. Every once in a while, I'll say to my girls, haven't you ever heard of children to be seen and not heard? Because that used to be a thing back in the day, right? That used to be an actual expectation. Of course, we're not at that anymore. And sometimes I wish they were, because the girls say really embarrassing things about me in front of people. But we can't parent in an autocratic way. But yet, a lot of us still feel like how can we, I mean, it's still in my DNA that kids don't speak disrespectfully to their parents. So what you're saying to me right now is really like difficult for a lot of us to hear, that you don't even address the fact that this person is calling you names. Well, and also, like I said, I came out of an abusive relationship where I got called names on a regular basis. So that's a trigger for me. I recognize that. So I'm just letting you know that's where a lot of us come from. It's like, kids shouldn't be speaking disrespectfully. I mean, I've had people say, shouldn't you put soap in their mouths? And that's never been, to me, something that would be terribly effective anyway. But
well, and that's an important piece. And these parts, this recommendation doesn't mean that you don't address that at all either.
okay.
And that's, I think, one of the difference, because the end point, I think it may be important to note, with the positive parenting styles, what we're looking at is actually, it's a lot of the groundwork that you're laying before that interaction.
Okay.
If the first time you're trying to connect with them is when they're calling you names, you already lost.
Yeah.
Good luck, right?
Right.
And so what we're looking at is there's a lot of things to build up, and we're looking at the long game. That short moment when they're calling you names is a moment, and it's a blip in time. And pretty much every parent's going to go through that, more or less, some more, some less, right? And that will depend on the kid, right?
Yeah, I should go on record as saying all three of my kids don't do this, just my one child. The other two are a piece of cake compared to her. Well, number 3 doesn't like to do anything at all. We'll get to that later. But just so you know, everyone knows, I don't have 3 kids calling me names all the time. And this
That's good.
And this oldest kid is not, I mean, she's extremely talented, intelligent, creative, artistic. I mean, she's on the honors list at school. She's athletic. That's one reason why I think she's anxious. She's such a high achiever. And I think she expects a lot of herself because she knows she can achieve a lot. And so it's like she works out that anxiety by going head to head with mom. And so anyway, keep going with where you were at.
Yeah,
what we should
no,
do.
that may be. So here's a part that how that might play out in different situations, though, in that moment. The empathic listening is a boundary actually in itself. Because when you're wondering, like, hey, how do we avoid the power struggle of that? You know, they're getting in there, and then you want to control them, but what's something you can't control? What they think and feel about you. And when you think about it for a moment, there's an action of calling you the name, but you can't actually stop her from thinking you're a dunderhead or whatever. I don't know what she calls you, but you know, like, you can't stop her from thinking that bad about you. That's hers to own. Right? Just like most restrictive government can control the people in a lot of physical ways, but they can't control what they think. And that's kind of like what we're attempting when you try to like make them not think you're an idiot.
Right.
Right? Or to love you, or to think that you're great. And sometimes that's where those control urges from us come from. We don't want them to think that. How can we control them, make that stop? Well, it's controlling that expression of it isn't going to change what they're thinking and feeling. So what's the issue at hand? Is it the words they're saying, or is it the relationship that's got a rift? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so that first piece then is to be understanding, hey, first I want to at least hear where they're coming from. Why do they think I'm a dunderhead? You know?
Right.
And so if I can, the empathic listening is just trying to come from it as genuine as possible. Where are they coming from? But what it's not doing is agreeing or disagreeing. This is why we call it reflecting. It's like they're talking to a mirror. It's like, you know, my mom's a dunderhead. Your mom's a dunderhead. You really feel like your mom's a dunderhead. Yeah. You know, how do you expect she would respond to that? If you just said, you really think I'm a dunderhead? You really don't like me. You really hate me. Do you have any idea? Like, sometimes I'll go through role plays with parents about that. Like, we'll take on the role of like the parent trying those, so they can kind of see, because they know better what their kid's going to do in those, and we can shift the role play.
I can almost guarantee what she would have said at that point. Yeah, well, you're stupid because you're not letting me do this, or you're stupid because you're not doing this for me. It's something like that would be the reaction.
Right. And see, with that reflecting, we keep following up. There's on that part, simply acknowledging where she's at as genuinely as possible. Like, it's really upsetting you. I wouldn't let you do that. You really feel like I'm not being kind to you. I'm not being good to you because of that. Now, notice in there, I never said, hey, I'm not being kind to you. You think, you're feeling, this is what you're, right? This is
Right.
what it sounds like.
Mhm.
And so with that, it's tentative phrases, a lot of times that sound like, it's expressing those things back. A couple things may happen. One, if she's wanting to be heard and understood, sometimes it will amplify the emotion first, and then it can soothe, or it may shift into tearful or hurt.
Mhm.
You're getting further into it. This is literally one of the skills that therapists use most, whether children or adults, is just acknowledging what's there, acknowledging what's being expressed without judgment.
Mhm.
And on that part, if she feels like you get it, one of the biggest things we need to know is that the other person gets it. Why is this so important to us? And that's a part. So a lot of times what may happen is they may kind of like break down. I use an example sometimes of one of my nephews when he was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, I want to say. He was pretty young. And I was watching them with, they had an older sister and a brother and stuff there. And we went and got ice cream, right? And we were all excited for the ice cream and we're getting ready to scoop it out. But who was getting ice cream in their bowl first? And my niece was helping me out, and she had them pick a number. And the number landed on the next older brother, right? And he was arguing, he was yelling, and they're like, oh, and when that happened, like, I think the siblings' reaction and mine at first was starting to be that same way. You get annoyed, right? When they're just kind of whining, it's like, it's going to be like 3 seconds, dude. I'm like, you get your ice cream in 3 seconds from now. There's no reason for a fit, right?
Uh-huh.
It's kind of the feel. And at first it was some of that. And they were trying to talk him into like, oh my gosh, you got to go first all the time, kind of that opposition back. And I paused for a moment. I just said, you're really feeling left out. You're really feeling like this isn't right. Like, it's not okay. And he went from being really angry to breaking down, and he little cried. He's like, yeah, I feel like you guys don't care as much. And in that moment, we was able to be there and nurture him, and his siblings did too. It's like, oh, and then he was more receptive once we nurtured, and didn't take more than a minute or two in this situation. His siblings were like, oh, well, you remember, like, you did go first that other time, something they were already saying, but he wasn't open to. And he was like, yeah, okay. It's like, well, after that, what we did is we scooped ice cream for his brother first, and he was fine with it.
Because he was heard and understood.
Because the issue at hand was he didn't feel loved. It's what the ice cream symbolized. And it wasn't actually about going first and anything like that. It was about that he needed to know that he was loved and we cared about him. And once we expressed that for him in that moment, it doesn't always work so beautifully. And that's a nice example, right? It doesn't always go that way. But that's what he needed. And it resolved some of that emotional part. We were able to move on within a couple minutes and without the tantrum. And that's a good example. I like sharing that because it's a good example when it works that way. Sometimes that's what you'll get is intense emotion at first, then some like maybe even like sad or upset or tearful resolve, and then kind of resolve when they feel nurtured. And then they're more open to actually those pieces. So what did your daughter need? I don't know. With the empathic listening, it might have been, what else might have been going on? That might have come up some more with the empathic listening side. And then later on after that, we can come on the back end with the empathy and state the limits. It's not okay to call people names. It's not okay to say those pieces, after she's calmed. When she's amped up, saying that to her is just going to be force. It's brute force. Mm-hmm. How do I control you to make you stop saying it versus you feel connected now? Now, how do I help you to understand how to respond when you are upset? And if there's repeat problems with that, talking about it when they're calm and their brain is calmer is going to go way further. Because now when they're regretting it and feeling like, oh, man, I said those things, that was really harsh. Most people know that. Mm-hmm. Even kids with really bad behaviors, one of the things that happens is the response that they get from others, they tend to use to justify and shame themselves as well. Mm-hmm. So they're like, come out of it leaving kind of that feel of like, I'm a monster. Look at what I did. Look at how I treated my parents or my teacher or somebody else, right? My brother. And they're just like, they don't want to be a monster and they don't know what to do with it. So what do? Well, you either try to make it right. You get the honeymoon stage sometimes in abuse cycles until they're still not dealing with their emotions and blow up again. Or they just own they're a monster and not try, and just kind of like, well, it got me what I wanted or closer to it, or they're not doing good things either. So why am I going to try? I don't know if that makes sense.
Mhm.
That was a long tangent of those, of course. I tend to do tangents, as you might notice.
Yeah, well, I really like the idea of empathic listening, so I need to work on that. I have to like, it's almost like I'm gonna have to shift into therapist mode instead of mom for a minute or something, so that I can take myself out of my, she shouldn't be calling me that brain and into a, what's going on with her mindset instead. That's what I'm thinking.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a part with tabling it. And sometimes if that's hard to do, that can be helpful to get our own counseling and our own therapy and work on our own coping skills to be able to get to that point to do that. But it is hard to do. It's really hard to do. I tell people, like, it's easier for me to do it as a therapist than it is in my own personal life, of course, because there's not the, I don't have the investment in therapy as much, right? It's not really about me, and it's easier to take it from that context in therapy, right?
Right.
Whereas, and it's not constant, and I get to walk away.
Not in your house. Yeah, you can go home.
Right.
I think a good therapist is worth their weight in gold. I have a really great one, and I didn't want to do this with her because I felt like that would be kind of a conflict of interest. But I highly recommend to people that if you've been thinking about it, go for it. Go do it.
Yeah.
We're great.
It's hard to say that sometimes, I will say, without saying, like, this is happening with your kids because you're screwed up. That's not, because that's, I think, the way it comes off, the way that it can feel at times. And it can be kind of tricky to help explain. It's not really about that. It's not that these things are coming from you or your fault.
Right.
And that I think two of the biggest things I would say, that the biggest, I think, misconceptions that I think parents would have is, number one, is that nothing they do is going to negatively affect their children. And the other one is that everything they do is going to negatively affect their children, right? So it's kind of like these big jumps, I think, on those. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, I was going to go on to some more of these questions and that we got on Facebook when I posted this. So one of them was, what should we do? All right, now that's the last one. All right. How can we encourage older children to accept responsibility instead of blaming others? That's a good one, because that's the same thing that I see with my oldest child. It's what I consider gaslighting. Like, she'll break something. Well, it's just that thing that I broke. It's not a big thing. It's not. It's like, I said, own it. Just own it. Take responsibility for it. And she threw a thing the other day, and she wasn't trying to break the little cover on the glass. It's a chandelier piece, but she did. So fortunately, she did own that one right away, and we went and I made her pay to buy a new one. But so many times when she does things, whether it's with me or Sibs, it's, I just kicked you. It's not a big deal. You barely even felt it. It's not a big deal at all. And that just makes me crazy, because they've got to own it. I can't raise kids that don't own what they just did, instead of trying to brush everything off all the time.
Yeah. Well, some of this comes back on some of that same piece. One of the first parts is people tend to show empathy when they receive empathy.
Okay.
And one of the things that happens, and this is tricky with siblings, because there's two sides, or however many sides to every little interaction. And no matter who you're trying to address first, the other person's going to either feel like you're siding with them, or like you're against them, or whatever it is.
Oh yeah.
So it's I want to acknowledge first that there's nuance to how to do those things first. But yeah, the empathic listening can be a helpful one at first too. When there's a difference between, hey, the consequence, the punishment for doing that is you're going to go buy it, versus, let me be empathetic. Yeah, you didn't intend to do that. That's really difficult. Yeah. And in the end, it's going to be, and then after some of the empathy and their feelings from that, it's like, these are then the values we're teaching. Hey, when we do something, even if it's not on purpose, it's still up to us to take responsibility for it and to correct it. And so we hear some things, and maybe explore some things to do, or, if they're maybe telling them, but sometimes exploring that first with them, that's part of emotion coaching. What can we do now to help with this? We have this chandelier that's broken, and although you didn't do it on purpose, it's something that you need to take responsibility for. How could you do that? right? And that gives them a chance to kind of talk about like, okay, well, what is it? And she might have some other ideas, and some kids will have harsh, or some kids will have way too easygoing. Oh, I could just say, I'm sorry for doing that.
Oh,
Peace out.
You get the sorry is what, I usually see.
Right.
Sorry, which of course isn't really sorry. So you're saying I should do some empathic listening with them first before we discuss the consequences? Like,
Absolutely.
For example, if my oldest throws this happens all the time. She'll throw something at one of her sisters or something. Like, let's just say she throws something at one of her sisters and the other sister starts crying because it hurt. Well, that barely hurt. That barely hit you. That didn't hurt. What am I saying to her? Like, how am I empathically listening?
Yeah. That's the part gets tricky on those more, right? When it's the like the lamp or a chandelier, it's an object, which means there's more room for that empathy for her first, because there's nobody else's emotions to consider in that moment, really. You could say your own because of that lamp. When it involves, though, a sibling, there's also empathy for the sibling.
Oh, right.
And so one of those parts that I would say first in that way, if she's throwing something at the sibling, is first, ask her, to step back. Don't, my mind's going different directions, but first, just nurture and provide some empathy for the one that was hit. And then, it can be helpful at some of those times to have them go to different places, but that gets a little bit tricky if they're not willing to. If neither of them are willing to do that. But so if need be, there's empathy towards the person that was hit first on that piece. And then there's also, and being very overt about it, empathy towards the other person, towards the one that threw the thing. It sounds like what is it? Why that reaction? And when you think about the anxieties, and the guilt feelings, what that is a lot of times is dismissing it, is trying to offload guilt. We're trying not to feel guilty for something we did, or feeling bad about it. That suggests there's part of her that's already feeling bad about it, doesn't want to feel that. She doesn't know maybe how to deal with that. So that's the emotion you're trying to deal with in coaching. So as you kind of notice, though, those pieces, you can kind of reflect, and you can start even with reflecting what's there. What did she say? You don't really feel like this was a big deal. You're feeling like you didn't really, it was okay to do that. And if you can do that in an understanding, not an accusatory way, because it's hard on the tone. I will say this is one of the hardest parts of doing that in the moment with the emotion, is to be genuine and not to be like sarcastic or like, oh, you really don't think that's a big deal, huh?
I almost feel like I need to create a persona. I saw someone do this on NCIS once. A persona like someone else that's the therapist. Like, instead of Annette, maybe it's Angie or something. So like therapist Angie needs to come in and take over and say, so, because Annette, the mom, is ticked. So it's almost like, I need to, okay, Angie, get a hat on or something. Angie, the therapist, is now here, mentally, so that I can do that, because that's so hard. Because again, it's a trigger when you see again and again one of the kids being mean to the other kid. And of course, that's the dynamic. I have an oldest and a youngest, and the oldest likes to bully the youngest. And then the youngest likes to really overreact. And even though I coach her all the time, she likes that reaction. See, she's getting a reaction out of you. So if you would not react, then she would stop doing it. She's 10 and it's just not, it's not working when I tell her to do that. She still completely overreacts and screams. And so that dynamic is awfully difficult.
Yeah, and there's also, we talked about that Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids book. That's Laura Markham and stuff. She's got that AHA parenting website, and it's got some good things, but she also has one, Peaceful Parent, Happy Siblings, and she's got some great suggestions in there for some of that sibling dynamic.
I need to get that book then.
Yeah, it builds on those exact same principles that she talks about. Oh, and I realize those, but other people, I hadn't shared some of those. So in a nutshell, I like the way she breaks down some of the positive parenting. She calls it peaceful parenting, kind of her run through of that. But she talks about like manage your own emotions. And I'm not going to probably get to reading. If you go into her book and you're like, oh, Sam didn't get it right. This is kind of in a nutshell, the basics of it. The wording might be a little different, but manage your own emotions first as the parent, as the adult. The second one is to nurture connection. And these are the preemptive, is spending regular one-on-one time with each of the kids. Outside of that, it's doing things to reconnect at typical problem times, doing things to kind of have connection time when, leading up. So if you know a time's going to be hard for them emotionally, same thing as you could do with yourself if you're nurturing yourself, plan something to help get through it. What's something to help them feel connected, so when they're heading into it, it's just a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And the third aspect is coaching, not controlling. We're going to feel the urge to control and make it happen and make them be sweet, loving children to each other and love their siblings and love us and love everybody around them, even when they're feeling miserable. And goodness gracious, if we have to be not sweet and loving ourselves to get them to do it, we're going to do it. So coaching, not controlling, is that emotion coaching. It's the in the moment stuff we've been talking about. The emotions come up, we're going to acknowledge the emotions, we're going to help them to kind of notice that, and then help them to plan to do a different behavior and execute a different behavior. And that's kind of a long-term piece. So those are the three categories.
Yeah.
So,
I actually wrote an article on that a long time ago. The 3 Ts.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so I'm really glad that you're reminding me of this, because I need to go back. The one thing that did stick is that I do have individual time with my girls. It's usually just 10 minutes, but they'll come in and say, Mom, let's have our 10 minutes. And so they got into the habit of it. And so, yes. And I took them all out to lunch individually last week, finally, for the first time. Each of them for like an hour, one-on-one, which was really nice, because that's hard to do when you're a single parent. Because you can't usually leave them. They're older now, so I can leave 2 of them alone at home together, but before I couldn't. And so it was a little more challenging. But even just 10 minutes one-on-one on the trampoline, or 10 minutes one-on-one playing with their toys or whatever, always makes a difference. And they ask for it. They know that that's a policy. So
yeah. And that's so great. They know they can ask for it. So
I never
the fact that they know they can come up to you. Well, yeah, I mean, it's nice, right? Yeah, not to knock them asking for, yeah.
Right. No, that they know that they can ask, and that I need to be more consistent on giving it to them regularly and offering it. I just need to. I think this has been a really good reminder, wake up call. All right, next question. How can we, I think you've kind of talked about this a little bit, how can we teach them to learn to manage their anger more effectively? That's emotion coaching, right? Where empathic listening and responding, what do you call that? Reacting? No, what is it? Mirroring?
Reflecting, yeah.
Reflecting, yes, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, and then this is one, I don't know how much detail we can go on, but it says how to help an attitude-ridden child who has HF autism. I don't even know what that means.
High functioning, probably.
Oh, okay, probably. But is refusing to adults and wants to revert to acting like a little kid to avoid responsibilities.
So this is a trickier one, I will say, because you're dealing with an adult. If there is not, it is a bit of a trick, because there's a lot of times, and there may be some things, if there's any kind of delays, social, emotional, cognitive delays, or anything like that, that is affecting their ability to adult, then number one, ideally it's better to address those things early on as a child, as they're working on on basically their they call it independent living skills, but skills working towards adulting. There are programs that can work with that adult child on for autism skills and things like that, and help them through those. It's tricky because it does come down to a little bit of a difference, because they have more rights as an adult. If they are not still a dependent, if there's not some situation that leaves them because of a disability, not able to make decisions for themselves, or to do some of those things, then ultimately they have more rights. And if you try to contradict that by telling them what to do and treat them like they're still 10 or 14, which possibly in some cases may still be how they're acting. That's a different piece. And so that gets a little bit tricky on those things. But one of the parts is looking at how, one, relationship is always going to be important. If you have adult children, right? If you're 90 and you have an adult child that's 70, it's still nice to do some things, right? And show them one-on-one individual attention. That's good for any relationship, no matter the age. So having some of those is an important factor. But as they're working towards adulting, showing them confidence in them, but you're going to have boundaries for your house and making it clear. Not having punishment isn't the same as not having limits. We don't look to punish. We're not like, you do this. Punishment is like, is a control-based focus, right? You do this, or this is the consequence. This is the thing that, and we say consequence, it's usually punishment. This is what I'm going to impose on you. And what happens with that though, is you're again, we're not wired for obedience. We're wired for connection and independence. And so when you're doing that, you're creating kind of the setting for a power struggle. Not intentionally, right? Some people will respond to that better. Some people, you give them that push and you give them that structure and they're like, okay, and they'll do it. They're just kind of easygoing. They probably have a personality where your connection is better without having to work at it so much, or maybe you have worked at it a lot. Anyway, my tangents there, but basically then some of the things is the boundaries. How are you going to care for yourself? What are the conditions of them living there? What are the things? And now, what are you willing to follow through on your boundaries if they're not going to do those pieces? And this comes into a thing with any relationship, is the principle of least interest. I don't know if you've heard of that, but we use it all the time. And it was only in learning about therapy that I learned the term, but the principle of least interest is whoever has the least interest in an interaction or a relationship has the most power. Right? It's like the old horse trading sales thing, right? Whoever talks price first loses, because you've now expressed the most interest in it and they know where you stand. So same kind of thing. We see this, right, with phone calls or whatever, and dating can be like that, right? It's like, oh, wait, if they call me back first, do I call them or not? Who wants to see the other person more? The other person has the power.
Right.
But in the case with the children, including with the adult child, there is, you may have more, or the parent, whoever may have more interest in them, whatever it is, hygiene, taking care of laundry, getting a job, getting out of the basement, whatever it is, cleaning up after themselves. You have more interest in them doing that than they do, or than the consequence of that for them. How's it affect them? If it doesn't really, why are they going to do it?
Right.
You know what I mean? So those are some of the pieces where you can, there can be conditions on different things, and some of the limits aren't the same as punishment. For example, saying like, you don't have to pay for everything for them at that stage. You don't have to do all of the parts. And that can be really scary, because if you're not confident that they can take care of that themselves, you may hesitate to do it, but it is falling in your lap.
Right.
So I don't know. That's, I guess, a quick nutshell. That gets actually kind of complicated and trying to find solutions. But
question. So, all right. Here, the next one is, I would love to know how not to get into a power struggle or get out of one if it happens. And then she's talking about her son with special needs, but she thinks this happens. Well, I think we already kind of got into that, is the empathic listening and trying to figure out where that person's coming from. So the next one is, and this is also one that I want to know about as well, is how can we help our kiddos transition back to primary home after a visit with their other parent? Is there a way to do it seamlessly without attitude / temper tantrums for the first few days after coming back? For me, it's not usually first few days, but there is always what I like to call a rough re-entry. They're coming from one house back to the other one, and their behaviors are not great at the beginning.
Sure. One part would be to note that those changes really can be difficult on children. And you think about it like, and I won't ask you to like comment on that personally or anybody else specifically, but just as an example, I know there's a lot of people who the relationship with their ex is such that they're going to feel anxious and frustrated and intense coming back from that as well. If they have to interact for like a minute or two even. Yeah. Now I'm not going to try to judge any of that part. The fact is, we're human, we have emotions. Change and facing things that bring up strong emotions are hard. For kids, for a lot of different reasons, that shift can be hard. We have different sets of rules. We may be, shifting from, and that's true even coming back from school at times, right? Kids have a lot of times a hard time coming back because we have a shift of, this is how it is here, this is how it is there. And finding the space to kind of shift gears and change that, and even just picking up all their stuff, emotions that may bring up about parents' relationship, It's not unusual for kids, even years later, to sometimes wish that their parents had done things differently. Or maybe if things went really bad in the parent relationship, they might be reminded of traumas when making some of those switches, even if it's not current traumas happening. So bringing all that into account is, one, just being aware that what your children are experiencing at those times are kind of normal emotions to go through with a change. It's going to be irritable and they may not know why, and it can feel tense and just like everything got tossed upside down. One of the things I encourage is rituals for reentry, as you might say, right? And it's good to have, and people talk about structure, and that's good. But if you're coming right back off of that and we're like, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this, and we're going to get back into a routine or chores or things like that, probably not going to go as well. Some children that may, if they don't seem to respond with negativity, and having some of it, but probably go is going to be challenging. Focus maybe on reconnecting activities first off. What do you do to reconnect with them right when they're coming back? Just make it light, make it easy. Doesn't have to be all hunky-dory. It doesn't have to be really long or an all-day thing every time. A lot of times there's not time for that, depending on when the switch is or what else is happening those days. But finding something where it's just a little bit easier going, a little bit for them to decompress, kind of a little bit of a buffer area, and then and maybe a time frame for them to know, like, hey, what we do when we get back is we're going to have about an hour when we get home, kind of get settled and just relax, or what you guys might like to do. We can talk or play a game or something like that, and then we'll get going on this. And so having those clear expectations of what the schedule looks like, but also having it more connecting time, a little bit easier going. Some things that may be more positive. Some kids may experience, where they're feeling like they're kind of having to balance out mom and dad's feelings with each other when they switch houses. Maybe there tends to be a tendency to ask them questions about, like, would you guys do this? Did you guys do that? Sometimes very negative, sometimes thinly veiled negativity, sometimes even trying to be positive. It can be helpful, again, empathic listening. They're reflecting on that. It can be helpful just if they bring something up, but expressions of nurturing, like, oh, it's good to see you guys again. I'm so glad to see you, and if they express anything in negativity about being back, or positive or negative about, positive or negative, either way, about being back or about leaving or about being over at the other parents, I would encourage just acknowledge that. Just like, oh, it was hard for you. Something about that was hard for you, and just acknowledge those without taking sides. That gives them a room to kind of breathe, to like you or not like you, to like or not like the other parent. And if it's always okay whether they like or not like, then it gives them a little bit of room to decompress from some of those parent tensions. You're like, okay. So,
right. Yeah. The theme that's going through my mind right now in this whole topic is shifting from a focus of how can I control my kids and make them behave, to how can I better understand where my kids are coming from and try and coach them through whatever those emotions are that they're having, and how to understand them better. That's kind of what I'm seeing, and how to connect with them better.
That's it. Because most of the, where we are obedient tends to come from, again, either fear or connection. And when it's fear-based, it's inconsistent because we have that other alarm going off. But if we can do it from a place of connection and connect with them in advance and give them clear limits, but make it okay to struggle with those limits. Hey, it's okay to struggle. We understand that. We're also going to figure out how to approach it differently the next time. And now, what do we do now that we've made a mistake? And if we can do that ourselves and show that in our example in the way we respond to our mistakes, then those are things that really help over time. It's not always a quick fix. Sometimes behavioral responses are knock it off. We use because it's a quick fix, but it enhances the problem long-term, But yeah, if we can do that, like you said, that's kind of more the long-term strategy. The more they're feeling secure in that, and it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to make mistakes, the easier it is for them to come on to the next part of the struggle, which is, okay, I made the struggle. I said something I shouldn't have said. Now what do I do about it? How do I fix it? And that's what we all have to come to. We're all going to mess things up. We're all going to let our emotions fly and offload on people at different times, and hopefully not much. And we can work on those pieces, right? But that's it. It's giving them room for error and saying, hey, I'm understanding you're struggling too. And I'm struggling with that. And I'll work on this piece. I need you to work on this.
Awesome.
and then following up, and what's getting in the way of working on it.
Great. Okay, so the name of that book again that I have here in my house somewhere.
Yeah, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids.
Okay. And then
or Happy Siblings for the one.
I'm going to find that one because I think that would be really helpful as well. Is how those two kids from constantly fighting.
No, I should note too, these books, and a lot of them are geared towards younger kids, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like early, maybe mid-childhood years, so maybe up to like 12 or something at most. So, but a lot of the principles, if you learn the principles, they can still be adapted for older kids. It does get a little bit trickier because it's really the same kind of needs. It's just plays out sometimes in a little bit more unique ways.
Yeah, you're not gonna necessarily get a kid to sit on your lap when they're 13. I used to do that a lot when I would try and connect with them and emotion coach them. They'd sit on my lap and we'd talk. They're getting old for that. Are there any books that you recommend for teenage years or as they're getting into those years?
There are some. There is Positive Discipline is the name of some of the books and some of the offshoots. I want to say Jane Nelson. I'm going to look back at
the ocean behind you.
Yeah, at my ocean.
Yeah,
some of the books. The angle on my camera just shows you like the ceiling tiles and lights. I was playing with the angle and couldn't get it, so it's
this background.
Better view. Jane Nelson is one of the authors that wrote a lot about positive discipline some time ago. There's Jane Nelson. Yep.
Okay.
And there's a number of books, including some that I have that are like, I don't know, like 1,000. Like there's one that's topical A to Z, like, hey, if you run into this, here's some suggestions on how to handle it, that follow along similar guidelines as Laura Markham talks about. Daniel J. Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson have a number of books that they come from what they call interpersonal neurobiology, I want to say. It's a long name, I never remember it, but they're basically using a lot of the same kind of principles. It's very consistent between these styles.
Okay.
And so there's a number of those types. But yeah, there's some of those ones. The Positive Discipline has a lot more that's geared towards some teenage things in application of these principles, and as well as younger kids.
Okay.
There's only a couple things that I would change, and I would shift up from some of those where sometimes I think in some of the books that I've seen, they talk about like if a kid's having a hard time, like a tantrum, like separating yourself from the child. And more recent things have suggested not so much a separation, but maybe keeping a safe distance and reassuring them that they're safe. If they're freaking out, and rather than going like, I'm going to leave you alone until you calm down, that just leaves them alone and they don't know what to do with the emotion they already didn't know what to do with. Right. And so it kind of ends up with more shame on that. So away with the attachment, you can still stay present, but keep your distance, stay safe, but, reassure them like, I'm here. It's okay. It's just going to be okay. You're going to be safe. In a very genuine way, not patronizing, of course. I'm like, you're okay, knock it off.
Right. That's the opposite of what we're supposed to be saying. Okay.
Right. It's easy to slip with those things, so it does take practice.
Yes, especially when you're sarcastic like I am. Like, okay.
Yeah, I'm very sarcastic. So parents ask me often questions like these, and I'm like, okay, give me a minute, because my first response is going to be sarcasm. And then
that's why I'm almost thinking I need a persona, Angie the therapist, that's going to have to put her little mental Angie therapist cap on, because otherwise sarcastic mom may step in.
I might just suggest though that instead you think of it as like Annette the mom being the one that does the reflecting, and Angie is the one that has the sarcasm. that way it's their actual mother and not the split personality that's like I say that more jokingly, split personality, no diagnostic, right? That's telling them that you care and that you're understanding them rather than some strange lady with a hat.
Well, they don't know that. It's only going on in my head.
Oh, okay.
Now, that would be weird. Okay, just a minute, child. Let me get my hat. No, just maybe I just need to say, okay, Annette, get out of the usual sarcastic mode and get into your empathic listening mode now. And then maybe I can tell jokes to myself later about it.
One of the hardest things I think I found in my attempts to shift from the way that I was raised and the earlier training with behaviorism is because behaviorism has a lot of good principles, but I say it works best on dogs and orcas, right? Because that's what they use, the reinforcement. The human brain throws a wrench in some of that. But I say, like, one of the things I think is the mindset is recognizing that these are the things that are going to work best short and long term. My brain often still goes to those earlier things. And what I find a lot of times for myself is that it's hard to get into the shift of like, this is what's going to work. I don't have to respond with control in order to work through that relationship. The urge and kind of that animal urge that we have is the control. It's natural for it to come up. And so if we can treat ourselves with compassion when it does, like, okay, same thing we're looking for with the kid is the compassion. Here's the emotion. All right, this is hard. That's good for yourself too. And the best starting place is like, it's all right. Everybody's yelled at their kid at some point, more or less. That's a natural response. The tension, the urge to control and fix it, the urge to protect when somebody else is being aggressive, all natural. And it's just like, can we help to notice that, be compassionate with that part of ourselves? Will also work the same thing we're trying to guide the children through. Okay, now let me shift that. But it almost always has to start with that compassion for ourselves. Taking a deep breath. I still do that in situations, even sometimes with clients, if it's like real difficult with a kid and stuff, I might be like, okay, notice what's going on in my body, try to be mindful. Okay, here we go. There it is. And now I can try to like be present with them. Anyway, side note, but
no, it's a good one. I like it. So we need to be compassionate with ourselves in the moments when we start feeling like we want to control or some other emotion like that. And then once we've gotten a hold of ourselves, calm down, get a hold of yourself. Once we've gotten a hold of ourselves, to start with the empathic listening and the connection and all that. It's good stuff. So
yeah.
All right. Well, I really appreciate this, Sam. This has been really good. It's a lot of reminders to myself of like, I know this stuff. I've just not been good at putting into practice for a while. And that I'm not the only one going through this. And I know that for sure. All right. So I do want to mention that we talked before, and as we wrap up, I'm planning on doing another episode with you about how to raise our kids to be in the world, but not of the world. So I look forward to having that discussion. I was actually talking to my chiropractor about that this morning, and boy, he went off. And so it's a big topic. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. And so if you're listening and you have questions about that, reach out to me at Annette at AnnetteTalks.com. But that's going to be our next topic together. I'm not sure when we're going to do it yet, but I definitely want to do that one because, of course, I have that issue going on with my kids. So usually when I have something going on with my kids, I know a lot of other people have the same thing going on with their kids. And so we need to address it. So, well, I appreciate you so much, Sam. And you are full up, so because I know people are going to ask about trying to see you or getting your kids in to see you, their kids in to see you or something. But you are booked for a while. So if someone does want a referral, can you do something like that? Do you know of anyone you can refer kids to? Or
I do know some people to refer to. However, I usually actually encourage them to talk to their, probably if they're looking for insurance, their insurance company, as that ends up being one of the challenges with that is there's a lot of therapists around actually, although it's hard to find in person right now and people that are accepting new clients. And I will say that's a challenge. I used to keep more of a list, but it's hard to keep the lists up. So I've usually bumped people back to their insurance company more.
Well, that is the challenge. Finding someone that takes your insurance is the biggest hurdle actually that I've found. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
You're welcome. And thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.